Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Chitheads podcast. My guest today is actually a repeat guest, Alex Auder, who I interviewed for episode number 8 of the Chitheads podcast about 5 years ago. Before we get into today's interview, though, I just want to take a moment to explain a little bit about the format of today's episode. The first portion of the interview is actually a segment that Alex and I recorded after our initial interview. Alex reached out to me wanting to tackle the topic of yoga and socialism, so a couple days later we hopped back on Skype and decided to record this segment. We felt so good about it that we thought it would be interesting to feature it at the beginning of the episode. So today's interview really is in 2 parts. In the first part, Alex and I tackle the question of whether or not a yogi should be a socialist. And then in the second portion of the interview, which was actually the first portion that we recorded, Alex and I talk a lot of politics, and we also talk a little bit about Alex's satirical work on social media and how it relates to her asana teaching practice. I do need to offer a disclaimer. Alex Auder is a fan of more colorful language, so if curse words are offensive to you, you might think twice about listening. Other than that, this is an extremely fun and provocative episode, and I hope you enjoy it.
We love talking to each other so much, we just couldn't get enough of each other.
I just couldn't get enough.
Yeah, but I really want, it's like, you know, I've had this feeling before. It's fun that you're letting us do this because after, you know, doing these things, it's always like in retrospect when you have a little more space to think about what you want to say. I was like, well, your podcast is still called Embodied Philosophy, right?
The podcast is called Chitheads, yeah.
Oh, Chitheads,
yeah.
Right. But
the platform is called Embodied Philosophy, yeah.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
That's how I was thinking the podcast was called, but I knew it was called Chitheads, I realized. But then I was like, well, what does that mean? You know what I mean? Like, how do we embody the political philosophy we were talking about? And is that applicable to embodiment, you know, to somatic?
So just to give a little context, we're back. This is actually, Alex and I have decided to, as she was saying, revisit a couple points after we had gotten off of our very long discussion, about an hour and a half of chatting about mostly politics. Then, you had to run. I think we were both getting a little tired. And then, after the fact, you had sent me a text being like, what about yoga and socialism?
Yeah.
And asking me, if I thought, you needed to be a democratic socialist to be a, quote unquote, true yogi, to which I responded with a long-winded response.
Which is a great response. And I almost feel like we should read it, but I don't know if it's too long, you know?
Sure, we can read it. Why not? And then, so I'll read it, and then I'll maybe, because it is dense, I think, because, writing can always be slightly more dense than actually, than speaking about things. And then, and I'll kind of maybe slow it down and unpack a little bit of detail, and then you can kind of give me your thoughts, because I know you have them now. Not that you didn't have them before.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe I'll say the question too. I said, I wrote to Jacob right after we finished recording the last time, and I said, when I hung up, I realized that I wanted to ask you, meaning I wanted to ask Jacob, if he thought, is your pronoun he?
Yeah.
Jacob, thank you. I never asked that. If he thought that a yoga practice, and I wrote real yoga, which I think we'll end up getting into, if we can, we're going to try to keep this short-ish, requires you to be, I wrote a socialist, but we could add in a democratic socialist.
Right, yeah. To which I responded, and this is actually, it's interesting that you asked this, because I originally come from a political theory background, and I was, very much kind of in the kind of Marxist school of thought for a very long time. And so, and this has been an ongoing, challenge for me to see how these two, trajectories of thought, Eastern kind of wisdom, particularly the non-dual variety, and political philosophy intersect. And sometimes certain readings of Eastern traditions amount to a kind of conservatism. So there is, so all of this is really, it's about interpretation, I think, and it's about kind of the specific hermeneutic that you bring to the table. But anyway, so I said, well, naturally, I said, I'm actually not sure I have a straightforward answer. Naturally, it partly depends on what we mean by yoga, like you were saying, because, of course, yoga means different things to different people, and it's meant different things throughout history.
Yeah.
But it reminds me of a conversation I had with a Marxist who said they had a hard time with Eastern philosophy because they see consciousness as shaped by materialist conditions, structures of power, etc. And therefore, this is in conflict with the view of consciousness as primary and prior to these, materialist conditions. And so from this person's perspective, then Marxism and non-dual philosophy are in conflict. And then I said, well, from my perspective, they are not, because I actually think that this view, they can be held together. This view suggests that consciousness and awareness are the same thing. And so I said that, this view kind of conflates, this fancy philosophical word, conflates consciousness with awareness. Consciousness, of course, from the Indian traditions being the ground of being, Brahman, Shiva nature, while awareness is the subjective contraction of consciousness that is structured by social conditions, including systems of equality and power. So one's access to an intimacy with the former, that is consciousness as the ground of being, is often deeply constrained by the coordinates of the latter, or awareness, contracted awareness, those coordinates that are then, of course, manipulated and organized by systems of injustice or oppression. So then my answer after that long-winded response is, I guess, insofar, and I'm not sure about this is just, this is a hypothesis, I guess insofar as yoga is partly about cultivating the conditions whereby individuals can realize their own self as consciousness, it makes sense that a yogi would be a socialist, for the material conditions of unfettered capitalism can delimit the boundaries of awareness such that consciousness becomes less accessible to some. Maybe. And then I said, but of course, this is not always the case, since obviously many highly realized beings have been in, positions where they're subject to systems of oppression and still have been realized. And then I certainly wouldn't want to suggest that, we white privileged folk are somehow more capable of spiritual insight than our POC brothers and sisters just by virtue of the fact that we're less oppressed in these materialist ways. Because that's obviously not the case.
Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah. So I have to think about this more. That was where I ended up. And then I said, this is my own personal position. I think because I see yoga as that process by means of which we experience the fullness of consciousness, and how that experience then in turn shapes our embodied lives and activities, I guess it really boils down to the relationship between consciousness and awareness, and what political programs or theories, one could say, support the transformation of awareness such that consciousness can be more fully or deeply realized. Oh, that did take a long time to get through. Wow.
I love that. That was great having you read it like that, because I could really digest it again, because I took some time with it. And I really love that answer and really agree with it, and I have some ways that I would word it that is maybe like a more colloquial lay person's understanding, and you can also tell me if you agree with my rewording of some of it, the way I often talk, the way whenever I talk about Dharma, and I'm putting quotes around that for those who can't see, I often describe what you're describing in this, I think, in slightly different wording. So you can tell me if I am saying the same thing you're saying on some level.
Okay.
And I would say that I agree with your definition of yoga, taking into account that I believe there's many definitions. I don't believe yoga can be anything, though. I don't think you can say you're doing shopping and yoga, or all of these things people like to conflate and say it's all yoga. I don't.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yes,
yeah.
But I do believe that there are many interpretations, simply because even in the Vedanta, there's Advaita Vedanta,
exactly.
Dvaita Vedanta, obviously so many steps, and you know much more about that than I do, much more of the details. I mean, you've done much deeper studies. I just have a very maybe, I don't know, 10 years of studying Advaita Vedanta with one teacher, but I haven't dabbled into different texts.
Are
Okay.
you still are you still studying with Shuberji, by the way?
I'm not actually. And part of the reason, and I adore her and love her and credit her with so much of my knowledge, but part of the reason is I do find some political differences, and I do find right now in my life, as I mentioned, a little bit of a break with everything in the sense that I'm like, is this actually helping anybody else?
Yeah.
And again, and Shuberji is very much believes in karma and rebirth, and I find that those beliefs can be, you said it very well in the beginning of when you talked about it, but sort of how I would put it is maybe like detrimental to progressive political thinking.
Yeah, there's a kernel of, in the Indian tradition, there's traditions of renunciation, and renunciation is inherently, leave the world behind and say goodbye to the piss and shit. And if you want to be politically involved and integrated, you really have to have a kind of householder lens on the whole thing, which actually sees your practice and sees your philosophy as integrating with the cultural environment that you're in. And Vedanta is, this is of course debatable because some people would disagree, but Vedanta is arguably a renunciatory path, and so there's lots of, ways of reading it that implies that you're just trying to kind of mute your individuality and sort of dissolve into the ocean of consciousness, and and that is a little, you can see that as being contradictory to the process of affirming and recognizing various identities for the purpose of emancipation in various ways.
Yeah. Yes, that's really well said. So I think that I used to think that, in order to experience yoga, and let's define yoga for the fuck of it, just for this conversation, as what I think we're both defining it as, so I say the practice of yoga is the exploration of the essential nature of consciousness, Satchit, and how it can be defined as Satchit Ananda.
Yeah.
Which is colloquially translated as bliss. I prefer to say limitless expansion personally.
Yeah.
Sometimes
you're trying to contrast that with bliss as sort of oh, I'm so happy. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. So I prefer to say, my spiritual name Shuberji gave me is Anandi, but bliss, I find that English word is very one-dimensional, and it refers to an ending and a beginning of, right? Like I feel blissful, and then you don't feel blissful.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Whereas Ananda is limitless, it's infinite, it's pure awareness, expansion. Although how you describe awareness in here, I really like that, sends a little wrench into the situation. So in other words, you're using awareness as the how did you say that, the contraction
of subjective kind of cognitive.
The witness, the sakshi is the awareness.
Yeah.
But so if you're witnessing chit, consciousness, sat chit, the essential nature of consciousness, the witnessing act is still a form. It's still a prakriti on some level.
Yeah.
Right? And so in yoga, so the practice of yoga is that, let's say, and in yoga itself, it's witness merges with Brahman, so that it's just, sometimes I say pure awareness, right? That's the Satchitananda, you're no longer aware of something you have yoked with consciousness, so it's just vibratory. I often call it the ripples of vibratory awareness, and sometimes I call that a somatized consciousness because I'm using movements to get into this and breath. I call it a somatized consciousness, meaning consciousness now is lately I've used the phrase pre and post lingual. So when you are a baby, you are born with consciousness. I think we'd all agree that babies have consciousness, but the consciousness hasn't been codified. And that's a very fascinating study. How do we start thinking? Some people say it's an internalized act of what we hear in the external, the mother, and I put quotes around that, the archetypical mother's words. The environment has codified consciousness, intellectualized it, and codified by, language. And then the child the child externalizes it by beginning to mimic and talk.
Yeah.
And then is learned to internalize. Okay, that's one theory of how thinking is. So if we go to the pre-lingual, which is consciousness before language, before it's codified with language, and then post meaning I'm going to say like the liminal state of death, like the threshold between aliveness and deathness. I'm going to call that a version of Satchitananda. And when we merge into that again through practice, if that's what we want, and that's what I do think yoga is, that's the dissolution.
Is what? Is, sorry, say
it. So that yoga is when we actually merge into pure consciousness.
Got it,
and
yeah.
are dissolved.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and that's obviously not just me saying that. I think that's a true actual definition.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, you're not pulling that out of your ass.
No. People think I am. So, and as I always say, is that I used to think, oh, that's what I want to do, like become enlightened and do that. Then I was like, oh, obviously I don't, because I had children and like to fuck and like get high and enjoy life, and, you know, and even though there's not much fucking happening, friends, I'd like to do more of that, and move around. So I shifted my theory. So, okay, so in those days when I believed that, I believed that one had to believe in, and I might not have used the word socialism, but definitely in communal experience, because pure consciousness, Brahman, is shared by all, right? It's the most cliche thing, even what some people say namaste means, you know, namaste, I'm trying to say it right, is that, you know, we are all one, right? So that if you were a Republican or a libertarian, you wouldn't believe that. You think we're all individuals striving to get ahead, and like going back to the no maskers would say, why is it my responsibility to protect you, you know, blah, 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 blah. So I used to say that was very un-yogic. Like,
yeah.
In order to experience yoga, you have to believe in the community. You have to believe in the good of the community over the good of the self.
Yeah.
Okay. That said, obviously in modern postural yoga, there's tons of Trumpers, I think, you know, practicing movement. and even amongst our own intimate community, we have very conservative peoples out there, very conservative women who have even, I know, been supportive of Trump, people quite close to us.
Yeah, I don't know. This is sort of one of those things where, you know, normally I don't mind saying names, but I feel like we can talk about it without saying her name, just to, but I was surprised by that. I actually didn't know. So what is her justification for holding that particular view?
I have not had a personal discussion with her. I only know this through very close friends that have had a personal discussion, and I think I'm going to say it's probably financial, whether she says that or not, you know?
Yeah.
Because I would say, you know, to be a Republican, and of course, I get that I'm the kind of person who lumps many Democrats into the same ilk.
Totally.
Of course, it's not. But in order to be fiscally conservative, which I'm going to call a Republican, a Libertarian, and many Democrats, you have to be either an idiot or an asshole. You're either an idiot because if you're not rich, you're voting against your own self-benefit, and when I say idiot, I mean that in a sweet, tender way.
Yeah.
You've not figured out, either because you don't have the information under your belt, or you've been fed information you don't realize that you're voting against your own self-interests.
Yeah.
Or you're an asshole because you actually know that it's very oppressive to people, fiscal conservatives, and you want it anyways because all you care about is yourself because you're rich and the tax works for you. The cut in taxes that Trump has only benefited for the wealthy, and obviously not just Trump, so many people before Trump, including Democrats. So that said, I will say that the practice of what we think of yoga, of modern postural yoga, in no way requires someone to have intelligent political thinking.
No, absolutely not.
Yes. So I also see that if we look, I somehow like can come full circle, especially how you described what you said, Jacob. Like if yoga is how you and I are sort of defining it in terms of merging into, then on some level you could. I realize it really doesn't require socialism because it could actually support libertarianism, because it is very much like the work of the navel gazing, the study of the self, and then you dissolve. That really doesn't require any community contact at all, you know?
Yeah.
unless we start bringing in, of course, like the sutras, which are much later than Vedanta, but like the precepts of behavior, which is like nonviolence. And that, I think that the sutras bring in a little more of like social responsibility.
Yeah.
But I think that it's, so when I get it in that, when I start to look at it like that, where I'm like, wait, these ancient practices, pre-sutras, don't really require community activism, and mostly, as I always say, were, of course there's Ananda Mayima, like there's some famous women, but really, Ananda Mayima is not like taking care of children. Okay, yes, of course there's charitable things that end up being built around some of these gurus,
Mm-hmm.
do perhaps help underprivileged, it depends, and the hugging mother and etc. That said, none of these people are really like doing the schlock work of household.
Yeah.
And how does that relate to the work? I guess I'm saying, like, after a sort of, half of a lifetime, since I'm 50, of doing the schlock work, I don't know. Sometimes I'm just like, do the practices even fucking apply? Like, I think breath work applies, okay? Like, if I'm in a triggered state and I start to, like, try to broaden my, like, perspective into the, savanna field to calm my nervous system, and, these practices that can help to calm nervous system and to calm the breath, yes, that does help me. Other than that, and I know this sounds pessimistic, I honestly can't say that any of the practices have given me any practical help in the, like, trauma of life, of, like, being not a rich person, dealing with a husband, the 2 children, the trying to make a living, the trying to do the schooling, the cleaning, the da-da-da-da-da.
Yeah, no, I think you bring up a good point, and I think that with so many of these traditions, I think it is easy to follow a kind of what might be the stereotype of kind of the spiritual seeker who is like simply navel gazing and kind of going into their own internal world. And I think when that gets aligned with a society that is like hyper individualistic, then it kind of supports that. It's like, oh well, this is just like me, acquiring spiritual treasures so that I can then present myself to the world as this essentially branded spiritual being. Yeah. And I think that actually but the teachings are about so when you were talking about how it could support a kind of libertarian view, I think through a certain lens it could, but because libertarianism and also liberal individualism is contingent upon a notion of the individual that is autonomous and separate from the world, that is not a view that's supported by contemplative teachings, because almost unanimously the contemplative traditions are talking about the deconstruction of the autonomous separate self. Right?
It really helps me to hear. I'm like, yes, good. I don't have to reject it.
Yeah, so I think insofar as we don't pay attention to that aspect of the teaching, it can, essentially go the direction that you're describing. Mm-hmm. For me, it's like if my practices, and for me, I speak mostly of meditation because that's become the most central practice for me over the last 5 years since I met my teacher. Insofar as my practices are like refining and nourishing and supporting the subtler capacities in my everyday life to respond to other people more effectively, to communicate better, to not react, that's where it comes in. But I can still, with the wrong social ideology, use that for ill, it's not going to necessarily, I still need the supplemental process of actually applying all of those, embodied skills to the work that needs to be done, which is a different kind of, dimension of it all, I guess.
Yeah. And that's why the title of your work, of your platform, Embodied Philosophy, is a beautiful title, because to me, I interpret that as just what you said, as the philosophy. One has to choose the philosophy that one follows and embody it, right? And so, So if the philosophy is Vedanta and it's embodied, then yes, I would say the politics should follow. Yes, I think that it's important to be, to really practice discrimination.
Yeah.
Which the Sanskrit word I just forgot, even though I say it all the time.
Viveka.
Thank you, viveka. At all moments, is what are we embodying? What do we want? What's the intention? Which is like that with movement too. Like when you elevate the shoulder girdle, what is the purpose of that? When you depress it, what the shoulder girdle? What is the purpose? There's not one way to do it. It's what is it being used for?
Yeah.
Like what is the movement being used for? And I would say that with our philosophy too. And all of that said, and I remember that when we last spoke, I said I wanted to make sure to end on what I still like about yoga.
Yeah, we didn't get there, so let's get there.
Yeah. And so I would say it's just that. It's like the feeling of meditation, whether that's through kirtan, which I haven't done in quite a long time, like an actual long kirtan, or sitting in silence and stillness. After, usually it's helpful for me to have done a little bit of movement and breath work. To me, there is nothing like that, but it's very personal, very quiet, very internal, but that feeling of Satchitananda, of the expansion of consciousness, is truly still feels blissful to me, still feels so soothing, so spacious and therapeutic that, yes, I have not given that up, and I still find it very useful, but I also find it very lucky. Very privileged I'm even able to have, that I'm able to have that, those moments of silence and stillness, and the developed skills it requires to get there.
Yeah.
And some of that was just luck, just being like kicked into some rooms where that was happening, and I do think that all people, because I recently did post something that went a little micro viral just since we last spoke.
Which one?
It was a Marianne Williamson quote.
Oh, yeah. That was so funny. It was like just a perfect moment after that conversation that, something like that came out by her.
Yeah. And it was like, and there's a lot of like pushback too on it with people who are like, oh yeah, don't you believe no one should take personal responsibility, and da-da-da-da-da. I just blocked two dudes because I just couldn't take it anymore. And I looked at a BIPOC conservative person. I was like, fuck it. I don't even want to look at this person. and some other dude who like claims he came out of homelessness and people were lazy. But anyway, that's a different story.
I'm wondering if you also, because I think just to ask you, about what you appreciate about yoga, and just want to hear if this is part of your experience as well, because it's certainly. This is where I've like landed, is that a part of, even though, yoga does in its philosophical tradition have a lot of like things that are absolutes. I mean, Brahman is an absolute, Shiva nature is an absolute. And so there's a tendency to kind of rest in the finality of these things. Or it implies, an ultimate rest and a finality of something. Whereas I feel like in embodiment, the way that, what you're talking about, Satchitananda, the way that it eternal is expressed is actually an eternal openness, right? And that openness is also a questioning, an investigating, a discerning, and, always kind of deferring, a final resting place, and always being open to the possibility of growing, evolving, and learning more. And for me, that I think is, one of the things that I really kind of, it's even in the Vedas, right? At the beginning of the Vedas, it's like it's the hymn of creation or something. And it's like, whence did this come from? How did all of this arise? And then, the gods know, it says, the gods know, or perhaps they don't know, And so there's this constant like dialectic between knowing and not knowing that I think is, to me, the beautiful aspect of yoga.
I agree so much, and it's similar to neti neti. Not this, not that. Like, is it this? Neti neti. Am I my body? Neti neti. Am I my children? Neti neti. And I agree. And again, I will say that ultimately, it's the practice is truly a solo practice. Like, there's nothing more potent to eradicate your practice than living in close proximity to a person for long periods of time. And so, so like that's where when I'm in trigger state, because to me it's other people that trigger me. I always say, like, if I was the Dalai Lama, I've repeated this a million times, I'll say it again, and being fed, clothed, housed, and taken care of, I'd fucking be so radical spiritual right now. You can't imagine. I'd be way better than the Dalai Lama and any of those other fools. I'd be, like, so inspirational, and I'd be a fucking billionaire. But I'm not, because I gotta do shit and argue with my husband and children and, like, deal with, you know, like, the radical behavioral issues of teenagers, which truly ages you and puts a little wrench in your practice.
Yeah.
So, you know, and I'm not saying that makes me any better. I'm just saying regular life is fucking hard. You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
But, and I think it's totally legit to not choose that. That's what we started our conversation with. I was like, don't have children, Jacob. And I'm truly not condescending. Like, I believe it's totally legit to focus on embodied philosophy and do your life without kids. And I'm not saying, of course, I know you have a lifelong relationship and stuff. But I think, are you still with your partner?
No. No, we broke up almost 3 years ago. Yeah.
Oh, well, look at me, way behind the times. You can see the.
You know, listeners, I am single.
God, this man, if you have not seen him, is hot. I'm literally like googly-eyed, staring at him, clear blue eyes.
Oh my God, Alex, you're making me blush.
So all right, so well then you know what I mean, baby.
Yeah. I absolutely know. No, I definitely, I mean, one of the things that I have experienced in other spiritual practitioners, you know, is that there is this like, oh, I want to go live in an ashram. I want to go away from society because it makes it easier. Because because having to then, and you know, I love the idea or thinking about like God is other people, which is really tantra, you know, the tantric idea, like God is other people. So the way you treat other people is the way you treat God, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And I don't think I'm treating God very well, but and I would find it much easier to do, what's it called? What's that thing that everyone brags about, that Buddhist practice where it's so tough and hard, the monks, and they're like tortured, you know, and stuff like that?
What? That's not Tonglen, is it? That's like the only one I know.
I know. Whatever that is, that's my opinion. I'd rather do that than deal with a 30-year marriage.
Oh God. And what would he say if he listened to this episode?
Well, he's walking out. He already got mad.
He knows all about it.
I said, I have to go do this 15-minute thing. He's like, and you always have to do something, you know? And you always have to do something. Anyway, so now I gotta go.
And now for the prequel.
I think any of us who are hustling our shit, especially now in COVID, you know? I mean, you've been doing this podcast forever. I'm hustling more than usual, like using my Instagram following in order to sell things because you know, I have the swipe up ability, which is useful, right? To commodify your content on Instagram. Like that's one helpful thing to me in COVID, that I'm able to capitalize on the following, but it is also strange, and maybe the word is ironic, or some people might call it hypocritical. I so far haven't been, like, nobody's called me out so far, but I'm sort of waiting for that to happen, that my Instagram feed is somewhat based, especially before COVID, on critiquing, as you well know.
And now you've got a funnel.
So I do feel like what I'm selling is still in keeping with my morals and whatever authenticity. I don't like having, you know, I love that I never like put yoga postures on the internet and all that, you know, and now I do have to, because it's the only way for me. And I do bring home the bacon through yoga teaching. Like, it's not like I have other income or another job when my husband's not wealthy, you know, and he's part of this digital business too. So, you know, I don't feel like I've changed my teaching, and I don't feel like I'm changing what I'm saying on Instagram, but yet I am hustling my yoga shit on Instagram now. And I spend many hours a day making clips of myself doing yoga, you know. I try to keep it on brand, which is like, you know, putting little thought bubbles out of my asshole and pussy that say on demand. You know? Yeah. So
but do you think funny because I wanted to actually talk about this because of course anybody that knows your yoga classes knows that you teach with a lot of precision, and actually you're a very serious teacher, and yet
yeah,
your Instagram and your kind of social media public presence is like
yeah,
obviously very sarcastic, very satirical, and and extremely and provocative in various ways.
yeah,
And I've noticed that you actually have been using like little clips of your kind of more provocative moments, talking about a 70s porn, or how millennials don't get sarcasm, all these
yeah,
things that sort of like are kind of indicative of your kind of public presence. Is there anybody
yeah.
that's been surprised by you being kind of a serious teacher behind that, that sort of performative facade?
That's a great question. And in the past, before COVID, and before I had to like sell the yoga online, I always did wonder, like, there's definitely a discrepancy between my Instagram followers and my yoga students, or people who are interested in me for yoga. And I think, and I never had a lot of yoga students. I mean, and like, I had my little brick and mortar, and honestly, on average, I had 10 people a class,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, oftentimes I was teaching 4 people in the room.
No way.
And
When I came to your
oh,
class in Philadelphia, it was really packed. It was like a
you
Saturday
might have.
morning.
Yes, so Saturday mornings, that's the only time it's packed, and
Okay.
packed for us is 24 people. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
the room was full at 28. That's the most we could fit in. And honestly, I never taught a single class where I had to turn somebody away.
Mm.
So even on Saturday mornings, we didn't have more than 28 people. And I'm not complaining. I'm just saying I'm not that kind of teacher, and I don't know exactly why. Even at Kula, like, I never really packed the room. Like,
Yeah.
I would never have been the person with like the 40 students. So I know I haven't answered your question yet, but
You'll get there.
yeah. So I think that you know the Instagram following, whatever, the large, so-called large, I mean small compared to many, but large for me, doesn't translate to yoga students. And it was very interesting. Uh the first live class I taught, which is very early on in COVID, I had 400 people sign into it.
Wow.
Yeah. At $10 a pop, and I was like, "We're rich!" Ah, amazing! I was like, "I finally got rich." I was like, $4,000 a class. Whoa! I mean, and I knew it wouldn't last, but I thought maybe it would translate more to like 100 people. But it basically went steadily, steadily down. Now, and I'm back to 5 people a class.
No,
So
no,
I
you must have more than that.
well, we don't. The live doesn't get a lot of people. Whatever. This is boring because it's like I switch. I'm trying to keep the members, yada yada yada. So we're doing fine with
Mm-hmm.
between the on-demand situation. Nick set it up well, my husband, so it works. But honestly, in the live classes, it's not that many people. It's like 15, sometimes less, 10. But
But the
I and
nice
I
thing
don't.
about the
Yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I was thinking about that, and I still know I didn't answer your question. I will say that yes, some people are surprised that I'm a serious yoga teacher, but and I try to put little clips sometimes that have my actual yoga teaching in it. What I feel represents what I teach, but I don't know whether it was just the mass hysteria of all these live classes that happened those first couple weeks of COVID, or if there is something about the way I teach that wasn't you know what I mean? I'm like, did it drop down so much because people thought I was something else? And I never know whether that something else was they want more workout, sweaty class, or who knows? Or I did make a lot of very provocative political jokes that first week. Maybe they hated that.
Yeah, I mean, well, everyone was kind of, Zoom happy in those initial weeks, and it really was just like it skyrocketed, I think, pretty much everywhere. And then,
Yeah.
people kind of settled back into, their sort of like lazy habits or various, ways of doing things. So we already kind of are, in the interview now, and I'm not going to do this sort of like stop and like, I'll read your bio, which is what I normally do. But I do kind of want to step back and just give some
Yeah.
context for our conversation, because obviously I'm super excited to talk to you. And for those who are newer to the podcast, Alex was episode number 8, which was
Wow.
5 years ago now, Alex. Can you believe
That
that?
is so crazy. It seems like yesterday we sat in the sweet little room of Kula that's now closed down.
Yeah, is it closed officially?
Yeah, so the
Oh
Williams
no.
location is gone. Everything's emptied out. But
I
yeah,
didn't
but
even know that.
no, it's so sad. I actually felt more sad about that than closing my own place down because we got rid of our lease too very early on.
Oh, so Magu's done as well.
Magu is done. I mean, I still use Magu Yoga for the digital platform, but the brick and mortar's gone. The lease was up, and we were just like, we need to cut loose here.
Yeah, what are you going to do? Yeah.
I mean, I don't think brick and mortars are going to make it at all.
It's really just completely decimated the studio world.
It's not like how could one reopen before the vaccine? I don't see that at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, summertime, sure. I think everyone's going to try to hold on. And Nikki does still have a Kula location. And who knows, maybe she can hold on long enough or all the people who can, and then there will be a vaccine and then it will be okay. But honestly, I don't see how anyone can pay the rent with social distancing in a yoga studio and masks. I would never go to a group class with a mask on. That seems awful.
Oh, God. No.
No.
Exercising with a mask just in general just seems disgusting.
No, I don't see how. No.
Yeah. So anyway, 5 years ago, like you said, we were in the back room of Kula, now gone. That's incredibly sad. It was also, you had just found social media. I mean, it was pretty recent, right? Like this was the age of Haynes Her Way videos.
Yes.
Which you've kind of evolved a little bit from now. And the topics that we explored in that episode were, the title of the podcast it's very long. I've been using much shorter titles now, but Alex Auder on counterculture critiques of a commodified yoga scene, Vedanta, and facing death. So, no, we really ran the whole gamut. But, of course, the long-standing tradition, grounded in this first podcast was, skewering the yoga community, which you did so well. So, and continue to do so well in your Instagram presence. And, another thing that's changed over the last 5 years, of course, is that you actually have evolved quite a significant following. You have you were featured in the New York Times, which I just read that article actually this morning. I actually didn't know about it. And then, sorry to say, can you believe it? How dare I?
Times.
I mean, it was incredible. I mean, to be called yoga's Instagram provocateur, that must have been like a beautiful moment for you.
I will say it was very vindicating on many levels. Only because, I had been told to pipe down a few times by
I bet. I bet. And I want to hear more about that. You also were called one of the most influential yoga teachers by Sonima, which happened kind of soon after, I think, our initial interview. And you now also have a podcast called 15 Minutes with Alex, which I haven't been invited to be a guest on, but that's fine.
You will. You definitely.
Just kidding. And you have attracted on Instagram now a following of over 17,000 people, which, it might not be like, Caitlyn Jenner volume, but it's pretty big. So how has that all been, from Haynes Her Way till now? How has this evolving 5 years of increased kind of popularity and recognition in the yoga community landed for you?
You're sweet. You're good at this, by the way. Now that I'm podcasting as well, I'm taking notes on how smooth you are.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. It's so weird, like, as I approach 50, I'm 49, that, like, I never would have thought I would have cut off my pinky finger before I believed that I would have been, that, like, the a marker for the trajectory of my quote-unquote success would be my Instagram following, Like, that
it's a little ironic.
Truly was not in the plan at all. But, I'll say that I feel a sense of satisfaction that my critique that I do feel of the social media persona of wellness, yoga, spirituality was recognized in a mainstream publication that has a fair amount of heft. and did really, I will say, Katie Rosman, who I jokingly call my biographer, who was the writer of that article, I felt she did a good job in representing it. And honestly, it was a matter of 3 days that I got those 17,000 followers. And I actually probably had more, and that's gone slow. That went slowly down and sort of stays around the 7,500. So, and I felt that was a good sign too, because
absolutely.
You read one of those articles, you just press click to follow. I've done that a million times. Then you're like, what the fuck is this? So I think that especially when I start posting, certain things like pro Bernie Sanders posts and, kind of calling, for example, Lacey Phillips, is that her name, of To Be Magnetic, the manifestation lady guru. I call her a white supremacist, things like that. I think people pretty, I think there was a good couple thousand, because I think I was up at like 19,000 at one point, unclicked, So I keep a steady 17,500 because, there's
those are your diehards.
Yeah. But yeah, it felt, I won't lie, it felt damn good. And especially, the New York Times, as maybe unfair as it is such a marker for success for people, if you're recognized in the New York Times, that I did kind of want to be like, and fuck you too. It was like how I felt when I gave birth with both kids, because every time I was pregnant, people would be like, oh, you're going to have, that baby's huge. You are fucking huge. You're going to have a huge baby. And every time the head came out, and I had home birth and I was in a water tub, literally my first thought was like, fuck all y'all. This baby's a fucking 7 pound, 14 ounce average weight baby. That's how I just wanted to literally hold the baby up and go find all the fuckers on the street that told me I was having a big baby and be like, wrong, bitch. And that's how I felt when the New York Times article came out.
Wow, that's incredible. Is there anything that you would have changed about that article, or like that you wish had been kind of represented differently, or are you pretty satisfied with it?
Yeah, I do. I mean, so a couple of times, I didn't even know there's like comment section. I think I might have glanced at a couple comments and people were like, it's just because she's, a product of all these celebrities, like my parents, And then since then, a couple of times someone mentioned the name dropping, but, at the same time, I have no problem with that. Like I have pretty like deadbeat broke parents, except for my stepmother, Cindy Sherman, who's very well, but my dad and mom, who I love, but they are like literally don't have a penny to their name. So if I can use their names to get a little bit ahead, I'm fine with that. You know what I mean? If that's going to help me put some food on the table, great. And then the other thing is, and Katie told me this pretty clear, and I don't think she minds me talking about this, the New York Times journalist. I kept trying to steer it a little more towards the political, towards, I would word things, which we'll get to, I hope today, in a way. And she was like, you know what, that's too complex for the Times, for the style section. And she got it. She understood it, but she was like, that's going to be too much,
Yeah.
Like when I want to talk about like the internalized neoliberalism, one of the wellness industry and the voice, I'm sort of like honing in on it these days, how like the wellness industry is the voice of the woman. Like I would use the pronoun female for the wellness industry,
Mm-hmm.
But the woman has internalized the voice of the quote unquote the man, and the man being the corporate powers that be, and I would say that the corporate powers are the voice of neoliberalism. And so on some level, the woman, the wellness industry voice, if the pronoun is a woman, it is actually the voice of the man, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
We can get more to that if you want.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the things I just wanted to ask, just to kind of put our current conversation maybe into a little bit more context, is just to ask you, obviously there were certain, there was a certain kind of spirit of the yoga community at the time of our last interview. Things change rapidly in 5 years, right? Things really do change. And I think, that time was like the Babarazzi was very fresh. We talked a lot about that. And it seems a little bit like you would imagine there to be another website that would have served that function.
I know.
And something hasn't really evolved or emerged, really. But, what do you think has changed? Do you think that the yoga community has become more self-aware, less self-aware? is there like a positive kind of
Mhm.
self-reckoning that's been taking place over the last 5 years, or especially recently, or do you think it's the same old schlock?
Um, I'm tempted to say same old schlock. No, I think I know it's sad. I wish there's so many people who've never heard of and don't know what the Babarazzi is, and you can still access the
Yeah.
website. And I would love someone to like I don't know. I wish they'd be in the New York Times, like because it's sad to me. It's so hard to describe what they did, and
Hmm.
it was this this anonymous writer that I think was many writers. I actually know who the main person was, and
Yeah. Same.
you do, yeah, and I'm very good friends now with his ex-wife, who's gay but was married to him for a while.
Oh, okay.
Oddly, um,
Yeah.
so who I adore, and she just closed her brick and mortar too in Brooklyn. Anyway,
Sad. Which one
I
was
know.
hers? Uh,
Juniper. Her name is Deborah. Um,
oh,
BAA.
Juniper Studio. Where was that?
In oh my God, she will laugh so hard. I always forget the neighborhood. I'm like so idiotic in Brooklyn, but I've been there and
East
thought
Williamsburg,
it's
perhaps.
like it's near Fort Greene, that neighborhood.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Very
Clinton
big.
Hill.
Clint, I think so. Oh my God, I'm so embarrassed. Oh, I'm gonna have to look it up while we're talking because it's really embarrassing.
I mean, you
Um,
lived in New York for how many years,
I know,
Alex?
but
You should know
I'm
this.
that's what an old New Yorker I am that I still
You
don't
never
know
went to
Brooklyn.
Brooklyn.
Yes, I'm that old school. I swear to you. Um,
Oh my
that's how
God.
pathetic it is. When I was in high school, I went to like two Brooklyn parties. Nobody went to Brooklyn. I mean, except of course, like Brooklyn people, which um, Love is Juniper on Vanderbilt Avenue, 639 Vanderbilt. What's that neighborhood called?
I have no
Clinton.
idea.
No.
Maybe
Okay.
Clinton Hill. Anyway, I
Okay.
think it's fine.
We can cut this out. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cut it out. Cut and cut.
All
Okay.
right,
So
take two.
take two. So the Barbarazzi. I wish they were still around. And why did nothing come about? Well, I feel like they inspired me quite a bit. So I
Yeah.
would say that part of my, if we could call it work, was a branch of the Barbarazzi. Instagram, again, because I'm old, I'm late to the table on social media. During that time, Jacob, was Instagram a thing at all when Barbarazzi was posting
I
stuff?
don't, I think it was really, there wasn't the kind of, narcissistic, like, over presentation of one's kind of work or experience. I think initially it was, Instagram, it was around for maybe, it was probably, it must be almost 10 years old now, but I think initially it was more just like sharing pictures of your friends and blah, blah, blah. It wasn't like about your own personal brand. And I think it's
Yeah,
interesting if you look at like people's Instagram feed who have been on Instagram for a really long time, there
yeah,
is this movement, and this just kind of general acceptance of increasingly like selfies, just like it moved
yeah,
from being like, oh, photos of my life, photos of my
yeah,
environment, like this is me and my friends, on a
yes,
picnic or something, and then suddenly it's just like selfie, 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 selfie. And then in the gay
so
male
true.
world, it's selfie without a shirt on, of course, and six pack
Yeah,
and abs.
yes,
So
yes. That's absolutely true. I've noticed that too when I've been really like digging deep into somebody's profile, some trolling them or lurking, and I've gone way back to the beginning. Yes, I've noticed that as well. And yeah, I think it got worse after the Babarazzi, but now during COVID, because of the amazing rebellions, protests for Black Lives Matters and against police brutality,
yeah.
I think that, and against really systemic racism, which is now I've noticed becoming more against anti-capitalist thinking too, which is, I think, really wonderful. I have noticed that there is a little bit, maybe it could just be tokenism, but like when I posted yesterday a little thing I wrote, because I'm always trying to I feel like I'm always saying the same thing over and over again in different ways, right? Maybe that's what
Yeah.
we all do. And I woke up early one morning. I couldn't sleep, and I'd seen somebody's post, a wellness leader, not a huge one, someone we both know. I won't mention their name actually, but
Okay.
I saw her post. It's very easy to find out who it is. very super, like, super simple. We've seen this a million times. I'll read it to you. Uh, Getting your shit together requires a level of honesty you can't even imagine. There's nothing easy about realizing you're the one that's been holding you back this whole time.
So fucked
And
up.
it's a very recent post, and I feel like that is what I'm always talking about. But I realized that a lot of my videos that came after the Hainter Way, my doll and sheepskin videos, where I use the American Girl dolls, I'm constantly, that's the undercurrent of what I'm speaking to, that internalized neoliberalism. But I don't think people always get that. It's because it's very obviously I'm using humor and very weird layers over that, so I never say that straight out, in my videos. So sometimes when I do a post, this time I just took the quote and, wrote inherently racist on it and like put some red lines and wrote no, and then I added, should I read the paragraph I added just because?
Yeah, I think you should. Yeah, because I want to really unpack for people why that's inherently racist, so people can understand. Yeah.
Okay, and I don't, this might not. You will have your own way of saying it. Maybe, well, this is what that morning I was like, this is what I want to say to that, and the wellness industry, made up of individual women's voices, has internalized the voice of neoliberalism, which is the voice of the man, quote unquote, the man. The man is the corrupt corporate power that runs America, which I spelled with a K. Mm-hmm. In order to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, you need both the boots and the straps to begin with. Neoliberalism wants you to believe that the individual is responsible for her own financial success failure, when the truth is that what's really pinning us to the ground is the great hoax of trickle-down theory, which is also the source of systemic racism. Don't believe the hype. And I had a little more stuff in my stories that I put in, that I saved in the highlights. And, I feel like we could talk forever about this, and there's so many different ways to approach it. But got, I hate saying these things. It's so dumb to talk and how many likes you got, but for example, that got like 1,800 likes, whereas like my little yoga post got like 30 likes, my little yoga picture post, like trying to sell my class that day, so, which I like, I'm into that. So people are hungry for this, I think. And there was tons and tons of comments, like, hundreds of comments, 139 comments, I guess not hundreds, but, and very little pushback. One dude said, you have no idea what you're talking about. Of course it's up to the individual, and one woman told me I didn't understand my own power,
To which you say,
I was like, which I said, I thought I had a good answer, that I was like, I totally get my power as a privileged white woman. And in fact, that's why I'm saying this. I'm using my power to expose that us white ladies who are, lucky enough to earn a modest living doing what we love, which I consider myself able to do what I love, have power.
Yeah. Well, another way of getting to that point, of course, is that like we all like the idea that if you just pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, which is an inherently liberal idea that says, all resources essentially come from within, of course, is completely ignorant. Yeah. Essentially what you're saying, that there are contextual circumstances, there are, structured systems of oppression, institutionalized systems of oppression that, that limit many people's capacity to seek out various things. And so it's one of the it basically, and it's very kind of it's ignorant of those structures, essentially. Yeah
I think it's like, I don't think the person who wrote it is racist, you know what I'm saying? Like, this is what we're trying to get at right now in this time, like in this moment during this COVID pandemic. Amazingly, the country's been gutted open. And when we look inside, we're getting at this shit, which is great. I'm so happy that we're doing this. And so that the people who believe this, they're deeply, they've been deeply hypnotized by, in my opinion, my humble opinion, by late stage capitalism and really neoliberalism, because this is a woman writing this who's doing well for herself and is a great yoga teacher. I've taken her class many times. And yet she's not really able to see past, I know she also was selling doTERRA oils. It's all built up into the multi-level marketing system. It's sad because actually women are being told, and it's true, and it's what I was saying too, I do have to like hustle my shit to survive. We're still in the system. So I still have to hustle. If I chose to exit the system, like that would be a violence towards my family, right? Because I wouldn't be able to feed my kids or pay the rent. So we still have to participate in the system. And that's why I think that one can participate in the system and still critique it, right? And I've gotten a lot of pushback in the past about like, well, you're a hypocrite. You sell yoga classes, Yeah. And it's like, that is like saying that you can't live in America and critique America. That's one of the last beautiful things about America, that we are lucky enough to be able to critique the system, Yeah. So, I get that these women are just trying to figure their shit out and do well, and make a living. But I do think that many of them are blind to the fact that pushing these aphorisms about it only applies to them. So for example, someone who's quite privileged, beautiful, I'm going to say white woman. I'm sure there's plenty of people of color who, believe in these things as well. It's not like exclusive to white women. Yeah. That does work. Like you could meditate a bunch and think about being financially successful and like that you are your own obstacle to success. If you're like a neurotic fucking wealthy white lady, yes, our neuroses are our obstacles. And then things like landmark meditation, self-help books do apply because that is all that person. They just need that little awareness. The heart of yoga, those principles can work for that kind of person.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
yeah, exactly.
But for many people, it's so their lives are so far, so held down by economic injustice that I do think of it as a violence to say that out loud to especially if you have a large following.
Yeah.
I think of that as actually very dangerous information.
Yeah, and what's also interesting about it is, and I don't know who this person is, I'm going to dig for it later. But, I imagine that this individual, like most people in the yoga community right now, are at least paying lip service to Black Lives Matter. So one of the things that's interesting is that there seems to be no awareness of the conflict between the ideology of this statement and the support of the movement. Right? Exactly. And
so true. Yes. And that's what I, am obsessed with trying to reveal in a way that's not going to make enemies. Because if we make enemies out of everybody, which I've done, then you no longer dialogue. Right. And so, and I made an enemy very early on and I will say this woman's name because she's blocked me and I think she's such an idiot that I don't mind saying her name. And I've known her forever. And her name is Jessica Bellafato.
Okay.
And she is an original Jivamukti teacher and now lives in the Hamptons and teaches, sup yoga. And she's an excellent yoga teacher. I've taken her class years ago and she's a quite talented yoga teacher. She's blonde, crystal blue-eyed, gorgeous, has 2 kids, lived in the Hamptons, and is a no-masker, like a proud no-masker, and an anti-vaxxer, and posting things on Facebook that are really insane, like trying to take down an independent health food store in the Hamptons. Like she's participating in trying to take these people down because they're forcing people to wear masks because they asked this anti-vaxxer like doctor that everybody in the Hamptons goes to put on a mask, and he got mad, and now she's write them a letter. And meanwhile, she's hosting summer camp for kids in the Hamptons on paddleboards, which I'm fine with. I think that's perfectly safe to be out on a paddleboard outside, But the representation of her persona is truly incongruent. Like you're trying to get kids to come take your paddleboard, and yet at the same time you're trying to take down a local health food store for people to wear masks, And she posts. And, all these no-maskers are coinciding with anti-vaxxers. And I know people who are listening to this will say, because I'm sure there's plenty of anti-vaxxers who listen to this. And I, of course, question. And the hashtag is wake up. You've seen this, right? which I find so condescending. Like, I was fucking questioning vaccines before, people knew what the fuck wake up was, like, of course we question big pharma, those of us who are critical thinkers, but I find it so, myopic, the vision. Like, can't there be an and and an and? Like, we can question big pharma. We can be woke. We can also choose to vaccinate our kids because we realize that there's a greater good. I get that, like, women, we should have the ability to choose which vaccines we want, that there are maybe too many called for, but that's another story. It's also this anti-Bill Gates thing, they think Bill Gates is the devil. Of course, Bill Gates is crazy or weird. I'm not going to say crazy, is weird and has way too much money, but they think he's the devil, because he's gives a lot of money to vaccines, to vaccine research.
Oh, right. Okay.
And they say he owns the WHO, which there's probably some truth to, but and now they say that masks are unhealthy and actually, like, create more corona. There's it's such insane pseudoscience, like that it stimulates corona within your body. Tons of people in our yoga world, the wellness industry, believe this.
And well, what is it really? Because it's really interesting. I was actually listening to the BBC, which is sometimes nice because you kind of get a little glimpse of America from maybe not that different of a culture, but at least something different. And and it was it put into perspective just like the rest of the world doesn't see this public health issue, doesn't contort this public health issue into a political issue that like pits people on opposite sides of a problem. And it's like, what is it about American culture, from your perspective, that turns a public health issue into something like this, like with this no masker bullshit?
I'm fascinated by it. That's what I actually like. I want to find someone to have on my podcast that to really dig into this with, and I can't. I want a very sarcastic, like humorous, dark, but super smart person to like dig into this with me, and maybe that's us. Maybe that's you and me. Because so another one of the hashtags that Jessica uses, and I noticed the people who are into this use, is sovereignty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sovereignty, right?
So yeah, sovereignty. I say that wrong. Is it sovereignty?
Sovereignty. Yeah.
I always say sovereignty. I'm sort of known for this thing, like very common words. Don't cut it out. So I need people to know that I'm a real person who makes mistakes.
People are going to be so surprised, Alex.
So what got me blocked on Jessica's page is that I went, sometimes if I have a tequila and I have no patience, I'll just make a really, fucked up comment. And I get so annoyed that I'm blocked because I love, it's such a pastime to like fucking lurk on these idiocracy. So I said, hi, I'm a Trumper and I follow Alex Jones. And he told me that this was a great page to come to find my people. I would like to bring a gun to the Hamptons Farmers Market with some of you next time to protect my rights to not wear a mask. She blocked me right there. It's the mentality of don't tread on me. So I think the political thing is super fascinating, the question you ask, because I think it's really indicative of this wild west of America, that we're in this wild west, somebody like Jessica has no idea. I mean, maybe she does, but I don't think she does, that she's basically promoting libertarian ideals, right? I need my personal freedom is all that matters. And when in fact, they all say that like when you put the mask on, you're being submissive to the state, right? It's really interesting. And that all of us need to wake up and not see that our personal freedoms are being tread upon when they don't realize they're being cucked, which is a word I like to use, by the market. They're being cucked by corporations. They don't see that it's corporations who run America, that when the state has power, we would all have more freedom because we'd be given health care, we'd be given a good public education, we'd be given affordable housing, like nations that have democratic socialism, whereas we're actually totally cucked. All our freedoms are taken away because it's the man that's running things, the boss of the corporations. It's like four white men. Rupert Murdoch, Jeff Bezos. I mean, it's like that, and it's so it makes me crazy that these people don't see that. not saying you don't want to wear a mask is actually being cucked by them. And no maskers are inherently racist because 2 times more black people are dying of COVID than white people.
Exactly.
So what do we do?
I think we have to disseminate information, but who knows how far that will go, because I feel like it's so far down the rabbit hole of this kind of good and evil mentality. I mean, I really find, I mean, even in the last 5 years, because of course in the last 5 years Trump has become elected, we've seen this massive rift in our culture. I mean, I am really like, it's do you feel like it's more of the same, or do you feel an intensification of the culture wars to like an uglier and uglier degree?
I think an intensification, uglier and uglier degree. And I think that with, like, you can see, and because I do still dabble on Facebook, and that's where Jessica's writing these things, I get annoyed with myself too. I think that's how I start talking about that, because I do want to be able to disseminate information in a way that's palatable and digestible, but maybe it's not possible, in these Facebook comments threads. I often decide it's not possible. Like, nobody, what I wish I could get back on Jessica's page and say, like, do you see the inherent racism in saying you're not going to wear a mask? I might use my husband's profile to go in there, to say that. But I think that it's worse and worse, and I think it's going to continue to get worse, the culture wars, because also I feel bitter and angry at, our people, at so-called liberals and Democrats, because I do feel that we've been, as progressives, we were let down by identity politic. For example, the Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders issue. I'm still upset about that. I'm still mad that many of my very close friends didn't see that Bernie was a better choice, and still blame Bernie for Hillary's thing. And I hate bringing it up because I know it starts to bring this whole divisive thing. People are like, we can't be divisive. We have to stay together. But I don't know if I agree with that. Like I will vote for Biden, but I'm fucking depressed about it. And I think he's a blind, babbling, delusional racist from hell that doesn't realize he's racist, like same as the wellness people. You know what I mean? Like he doesn't know what the hell. He just follows the fucking tide of the Democratic Party, which was super racist, that the Clintons were involved with in all the, everything I think we all know, the crime bill, busing, all of that shit, that all of the other Democrats basically were hounding him in the debates. And now, of course, they supported him, because because everyone's scared of Bernie. And then they suddenly are like eviscerating him at the debate table. And now he's the greatest person to run the country. I mean, it's the most hypocritical, crazy shit, our fucking political system. And, but yeah, sure, I'll vote for the bumbling idiot. And, because like we have no other choice, but like, yeah, sorry, no, he's not any better than any other fucked up person who's been promoting systemic racism since Reagan times,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was really surprised actually that everyone thought he was the solution, because he just feels like more of the same. He's just an extension of really Hillary. Like, why would people think that is going to inspire the kind of people that were disappointed in that way of doing things beforehand? And of course, there's always the question of, or like the role of sexism in Hillary's loss, of course. But I just, it seemed pretty obvious to me that we actually need someone like Bernie to beat this bastard, like.
I know, and I get it. Like our whole primary situation is so messed up, right? So I get it. Yes, I admit Bernie didn't get the fucking black vote in the South, and that fucked him. And he did, and the youth didn't come out enough, and that fucked him. That said, I would cut off, which I think I already cut off one pinky finger today in a talk. I'm going to cut off another pinky finger. I would say that I bet he would win the primary if he was if we had Bernie as the nominee and we go into the primary in November. I actually would cut off a couple other fingers to bet he would win.
Yeah.
But I do see with the Elizabeth Warren stuff, I definitely was more swayed towards the sexism issue. Like I saw, when I look back, I was like, okay, yeah, it was definitely an issue of course, it was an issue for Hillary, but so many other things were also an issue for Hillary.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So, and it's very, in the climate, it's very hard to talk about that, right? It's very hard to say that, yes, there was sexism, but also Hillary has extremely powerful neoliberal policies that she supports, that are dangerous for the country. And by dangerous, I mean that are the fuel of systemic racism and economic injustice. And Elizabeth Warren, I do love and did love and would have been perfectly, wonderfully happy with her. I could have gone either way with Bernie or Elizabeth. And then you see the crazy hypocrisy of identity politics with people who love Warren and hate Bernie. I'm like, that makes no fucking sense. If someone wants to write me and tell me how you could love Elizabeth Warren and hate Bernie, please do. And I want an intelligent paragraph on that is printable. If you can write me that, anybody listening to this, I'll take it.
Okay, so can you say more about that? Because I know what you're talking about, but I'm not sure that some of the listeners will. Like, when you're describing sort of the way in which kind of the Democratic Party, the liberal kind of establishment, as we might call it now, has been taken over by identity politics. What is it that you're specifically talking about, and what is the alternative in terms of like a different kind of left sort of thinking?
Yes, great question. I'll answer the end part now is that I don't know what the alternative is, to be honest, because I'm feeling very pessimistic about it, and I just don't know. Like, I'm not smart enough to get. I'm not that kind of leader. If I'm a leader at all, I need someone to give me an alternative, and then I'll support it. But because I don't fucking know. But what I would say about trying to parse out that question, which is super hard to answer and talk about, but I would say that because of Trump and his violent narcissism, misogyny, and really I would say the one if he has any ideology, it's white supremacy, in my opinion. Like, I didn't before he became president, I would say I didn't actually really know that he was truly a white supremacist. I actually didn't get that. I thought he was just kind of crazy and dumb and a narcissist. Yeah. And I always he has no ideology. Like, he'll just go whatever way, But now I do see, oh right, he does, and he's a fucking deep white supremacist,
Yeah.
And it's chilling. So I think, and a deep misogynist, which is more common, I think, for male men in power. And he's just a little more raunchy and open about it, So I think because of that misogyny, the identity politic with the Republican Democrat got really, the culture wars got really separated. So everyone, the pussy hat wearing feminist, the she boss mentality got pushed to the forefront. And in my opinion, the she boss pussy wearing hat mentality is returning back to what we were just speaking about, is the same kind of mentality. Of course, there are true progressive feminists within that group, but there's many women in power who are the kind of women who basically believe that neo-spiritual wellness speak. It's, it's up to you. We can all get ahead. The American dream is real. If you work hard enough, you'll get ahead. There's a little piece of the pie, a little drips of the trickle down for everybody. I do feel like that's wrapped up in the ideology of the she boss, of like the, what's that big workspace that just got taken down? It's called
WeWork?
No, not WeWork. That as well.
Oh, WeWork is still alive.
Yeah. There's a big feminist one run by this major, young woman that recently got pulled down because they were not paying WOC and BIPOC basically in general. They were treating BIPOC badly and not paying them well. There was all this internal shit, but they were I'm sure people listening will know, I can't remember. It's called I almost want to say The Well or something, but I don't know what it's called. And they had Chanel products in the bathroom, and they brought busloads of women to the Women's March in 2016. And anyways, they just got completely, the woman had to step down and apologize. And there was a big takedown on social media. So I would say that style women, like Sarah Sophie Flicker, for example. Do you know who that is?
No, I don't.
Okay. I know her personally, and she's a lovely woman. Um, and she was a major Elizabeth Warren supporter.
Hmm.
And she did switch to Bernie. I'm going to say, and I'm putting words in her mouth because she told me she absolutely would, in person, she told me she would absolutely support Bernie if Warren didn't make it, but it was reluctant. Do you know what I'm saying? And she was
Hmm.
very mad at Bernie people, and she was promoting that Bernie bro thing, which is complete bullshit. I mean, I'm sure there's some Bernie bros out there, but there's also Hillary Clinton gals out there. What's the difference between a Clinton gal telling me I'm an asshole and a Bernie? Like it's like there's no difference in when you're trying to take it down. But so my point is that as if I truly am behind the policy, not the identity, not the pronoun of the candidate. I'm getting back to my point now. To me, the policies are important, not whether the person is a man or a woman, whether they're trans, whether they're black, white, brown, does not matter to me. I care about the policies, and I care about policies that promote economic justice and will help to eradicate systemic racism. And economic justice, in my opinion, is again part of systemic racism and are feminist. So to me, that's democratic socialist ideals. So I think Elizabeth Warren and Bernie had almost the exact same policies. Literally, the only difference was that Elizabeth Warren was a Republican when Bernie Sanders had already been fighting for those same ideals, right? That's my one critique of her, yes? But she intelligently saw that she was wrong and switched. Great. Respect that. Bernie was just doing it longer. That's all. He's always been the same. He's always had the same policy since he was a young man, unlike Clinton and Warren. But Warren seemed to be proving that she truly is behind those policies, and through her studies of the bubble and of the way money worked in government, she switched from Republican to Democrat because she did deep research and found out that, in fact, the Republican policies were inherently, as she would say, systemically racist and unjust, economically unjust. So what I would say is the people who loved Warren, there were many people who said like Warren was the person, and also no way Bernie, never Bernie.
Mm.
I do not understand that. That's, to me, you're just saying identity politics. Like, how could you believe in Warren's policies, which Bernie is the one who brought to the forefront? The only reason why Warren had a chance was because of Bernie in 2016. So that shows me that many people are just identity politics, or just about if she has a pussy, she's not a man, and
Right. So it's just sort of like I mean, well, one part would be like the personality, but also just kind of the basic fundamental identity, setting aside. So it kind of continues the obsession with kind of personality that maybe one could say started, somewhat, well, I mean, it's been for a long time, but certainly Obama, definitely Trump. It's this obsession with personality and identity, and then also I guess one of the things what to me seems apparent is that generally the identity politics becomes central when we forget about the economy and when we forget about capitalism. When capitalism slips into the backdrop of our cultural reality such that it is no longer open to critique and the possibility of transformation or even imagining a new, economic structure, then we get identity politics. Do you agree with that?
I agree with it so wholeheartedly. And that is what I think people had a hard time with about Bernie, because agreed that to be a politician, to become president of America, you have to have a fucking charming personality, right? There is a show there. And Bernie didn't really have that, right? Bernie did not possess that. That was one of his biggest downfalls, is that he was repetitive and old and yelled, right? That people didn't like the way, right? That's the only critique, he yells too much. Okay. And Warren was little more better packaged. Yes, because she was a woman, she had a softer tone voice. I mean, I thought she was an amazing debater. I thought she fucking rocked the debate floor, and did much better than Bernie on many of the issues. I truly thought she was excellent. on that front. But yet she still didn't quite have the package. And I thought, yes, it was very weird the way she tanked and the way she did. And I think part of the way she tanked was also with Bernie, the way they had that clash, right? Which was so fucked up and so, represented so badly in the media, the clash over the fact that supposedly Bernie said a woman can never be president, right? Do you remember this whole thing?
I don't
so
remember that, no.
During the debates, her team came out and said, it's dumb to rehash, but basically the Warren team said that Bernie said in private a woman could never become president. It was a huge, massive thing. And then during one of the debates, they had to bring it up and Bernie had to address it. And I thought he did a fine job. Then Warren went up and didn't shake his hand, when you see the little footage as the debates are ending, and it was this big deal. And and then everybody was writing about how this is the worst thing that could happen to the Progressive Party, that now there's this divisive thing between Bernie and Warren. It was a nightmare. It was all a terrible nightmare. And look, even if Bernie did say a woman can never be president, I could see him saying, of course, it's so stupid. Of course, he's not a misogynist. Bernie Sanders, give me a fucking break. Or no more so than any old straight man is, you can't be a misogynist and be a democratic socialist. All his policies are for workers, or for women workers. Anyways, it's so stupid. But I know people are probably like, of course you can be a misogynist and democratic socialist when they're listening. I always hear the inner dialogue of the listeners, the future inner dialogue. But what is my point right now? Oh, is that I don't have a point. I lost my train of thought. Oh, I know I wanted to read this thing, Jacob, and one other little short thing that's on my Instagram that I didn't write, that's written by this writer named Lee Stein, who has a novel out right now, a dark comedy about the wellness industry called Self-Care.
Ooh.
And write it down. And I did this little talk with her, a little Skype talk recently.
Okay.
And then she wrote this Medium article called "The End of the Girl Boss Is Here."
Oh yeah, you shared this the other day. I saw that.
Yeah. And it really speaks to what you were saying, Jacob, the way you worded the way when identity politics gets lost and forgets about the ills of late stage capitalism. It's not exactly how you said it. That's when we run into trouble. And she wrote woke, and I think this is a good word to bring up, woke capitalism lets the elites maintain the status quo while paying lip service to the demands of activists. And as ethical consumers, millennials get to feel like they're making a difference every time they go shopping. And I would say it's not just millennials. I do the same thing, and I'm a Gen Xer. I mean, I make myself feel better when I ethically shop. Until this country is willing to reckon with its extraordinary wealth inequality, and our government requires corporations to pay their fair share in taxes, we will continue to see reincarnations of the girl boss, because she's a manifestation of the American myth that says if you're not succeeding, it must be because you're not trying hard enough. Mm. So it's another way of saying everything we're talking about, but I think that, the sort of commodification of feminism can lose the thread. I think that's what we're also trying to say together about this identity politic issue. The thread is systemic racism, economic injustice, and capitalism, right? And in capitalism, and where we are in capitalism now, I have a great episode on our podcast where we interview Richard Wolff, who's an amazing socialist economist, professor emeritus at Columbia. He's been around forever. And it's one of my most recent episodes. And he's very he gives a lot of lectures. So when you listen to it, it's a lot of him talking, but it's great. Mm-hmm. And he really talks about how a lot of our anger, like the sovereignty no maskers, are directed to the state, when when our anger should be directed to the boss, because the capitalist contract has been broken, right? The original contract was like, I will employ you, you are my employee, there'll be a fair exchange, I pay you fairly, and he describes it as another iteration of the serf and the lord, and how the promise was broken, the American promise, because employee never got their fair share, as we know, and that, like I said, there's only these 6 white male bosses that own everything, and the wealth does not trickle down. And this is the issue, that we're stuck here with our tongue out, waiting for some little drips that aren't coming to us.
Wow. That's interesting. So yeah, you had mentioned that actually in some of the stuff that you sent to me about when we were preparing for the interview. And you also talked to him about, this is one of the questions you asked: in what ways do you think COVID is exposing the guts of our neoliberal system? And do you use the term neoliberal when referring to America? And could you speak about what this would look like, the shuttering of our marketplace? If we were a democratic socialist nation, would we be in a better position? So, I'm curious what you think about that in terms of, you've already talked about how COVID has exposed the guts of our neoliberal system, and I can tell by what you said earlier that you actually think this is kind of a good thing. But what do you think the relationship is then between this exposing the guts and then the movement for Black Lives that has been emerging? Like, it seems it's almost like it was fated. We needed a confrontation of our own, existence as a culture, and it just was a perfect storm of what needed to happen in order to reflect in a way.
I totally agree. And I think part of it, sorry, my phone dinged. I think part of it is, the people also want some, as we know, the health of the human being relies on commune with other human beings, right? When they studied the people who live the longest in the world, it's those old people in Greece who hang out every night with red wine and don't lock their doors and don't have a clock, It's like some island where they live the longest. They make their own olive oil and wine. They drink every night and play cards till 1 a.m, and there's no clocks and nothing opens until noon.
I love it.
Yeah, so that's really my mentality. But anyway, I think that our isolation, made us crave the force and power of gathering and protest. So some of it, it's lucky for Black Lives Matter that many of us lazy white folk wanted to get out there and be with each other, So it's some of it was just because I know my teenager is super, not that she's so activated for Black Lives Matter and has, a million more deep Black friends and lovers than I ever had. So I'm not saying that it's superficial for the teenagers, but the teenagers were going crazy. It's their worst nightmare to be in lockdown. And so they all were out on the streets right away, sanctioned by the adults. I drove my teenager to the protests. Yeah. So I think that the power of it was very lucky, that just human nature, that we want to get out there. Right. And then the fact that the markets were closed gives just all of us so much more time, right? We don't have our brick and mortars to man, so we can get out on the streets.
Yeah.
And then, the fact that the market relies on BIPOC,
Yeah.
Relies on paying BIPOC badly and really exploiting BIPOC. Mm-hmm. And women. Richard Wolff talks about that a lot, that the women and people of color, Black, brown, have been displaced to help the market when they're needed, and then spit out when they're not needed, and the women are chucked back into the home when they don't need it, and then pulled out into the marketplace when they're needed. And I think that there was the amazing footage of Fifth Avenue in Manhattan with all the stores, blocked. And when I posted that and said right on, but I'm not celebrating. Of course, there's beautiful, loving, progressive people who their livelihood is being destroyed, because of the markets being shut down. But at the same time, I think we have to go through this pain, even us, our marketplace, my brick and mortar shut down. And, because we're seeing that there's no backup. If you look at other countries right now, they're being paid wages. The community, the members of these other nations that have social democracy are are being paid while this is happening. And they have tests being brought, like in Scandinavia, there's like detectives come up to the door who are loved by the people. And I get that we're different in Scandinavia, and are like helping people figure out where COVID is in the community. Mm. Right? Because they're respected by the people.
Yeah, I mean, what is your thought on because obviously when they shut down the economy and we were all sent checks,
yeah.
This is
I never got mine.
I didn't get one either.
Yeah.
So, it seems like inherently, and maybe you agree with this or not, but it seems like inherently socialist gesture, like sending out, checks of support for the nation. It was necessary. And yet no one really, the people that, hate socialism, were like, send me my check, and so there was just like this, again, it's this irony of, when it's necessary, everybody, when there's really no alternative, people support socialism. And then it's like, but can't you extrapolate from this experience that actually a little bit more, support, and then also people making more money than even they do in their normal jobs, which just says like, if the government can afford to pay you more than you were making in your job, then you probably weren't making enough.
Exactly. We got the unemployment checks, not just the check that Trump sent everybody, but we managed to qualify for the full amount of the unemployment. And we were like, whoa, this is amazing. It came in the mail 4 days later. We had to have someone help us apply and all that. It's extremely complicated in Pennsylvania, at least. But yeah, it really shows that our system is so diseased. And I do fear, but I don't think so. I fear that it'll just go back to normal, right?
Yeah.
Or that people aren't going to translate, just like we're saying how the feminists are not translating the feminist ideology to economic justice ideology, to capitalism. But I don't see how it can go back to normal that soon, because as we see, we're being hit by whatever we want to call it, the same wave or the second wave in the red states.
Yeah.
And that's only going to get worse, right? Because it's still going up in Florida and Texas.
Which part of me thinks, I told you so. It's hard not to feel that way.
It's so weird to sit around hoping that people die, Like I'm like, are you kidding me? Boris fucking, what's his name? I always want to call him Boris Yeltsin from England. Didn't die.
Boris Johnson.
Yeah, Boris Johnson, got out of intensive care. What the fuck? Then it makes me believe in conspiracy and lizard people. I'm like, yeah, he's a lizard.
Oh my God, the lizard people.
But like, my mom's really into the lizard people and stuff.
Oh really?
Oh yeah. She's a major conspiracy person, and she's not speaking. Yeah.
I'm curious what you think about that, because I actually have some friends who believe in these kind of conspiracy theories. There's another conspiracy theory about how the moon. Well, it's not really conspiracy, but it's more like a belief that the moon isn't real. Right? Have you heard this one? Like the moon is a tin can, and we know because we sent a missile at the moon and it rang like a bell. Well, first of all, no one can hear in space, so I don't know how it could have rung like a bell. But this is like one of these things. It's an ancient satellite put on, above. Obviously put in orbit of the Earth for some kind of like reason that we no longer know.
Oh my God. You know what? I have not fucking heard that. My mom believes that no one landed on the moon, so I'm sure Tin Can Moon is next, And like, it does make me, I don't like the fact that I get like this, but it makes me crazy. Makes me so mad because the conspiracy is so obvious. It's right in front of our eyes. The conspiracy is what we're talking about, is that capitalism is going to benefit anybody. That's the conspiracy. The trick. My husband always says, the greatest hoax of our time, trickle down theory.
Yeah. Totally.
I wanted to add in this one thing when I was talking about Richard Wolff that I think is important about the way the contract was broken in capitalism, and what he says in terms of police brutality is that, and I guess it's fairly obvious when I say this aloud, but I think it's important to say, is that the police's contract is to protect those in power, the corporate power, and to hold down basically women and BIPOC, and which is, it's so that, inherently the role of the police is to uphold the capitalist contract, which means upholding the corporate bosses. which is why that it's very important to the language of looting correctly, in my opinion, that like,
what do you mean by that?
Oh, meaning that like protecting the stores when the police come in riot gear and militarized gear to protect the marketplace. That's a very interesting message,
Yeah.
because agreed, innocent smaller stores can get wrapped up into the looting, of course. And mostly that's what, at least in our neighborhoods, it was set, a lot of like even Black shop owners themselves got looted, So I'm not trying to say that looting is only done to, target, for example, obviously smaller places are looted, but the idea of militarized police coming in to protect marketplace is inherently the issue, that our protection is for the corporate powers, the man, I put quotes around it, and not for the underprivileged.
Yeah.
Which is the whole point, obviously, of the protest. But I'm just saying that in a way that's relating it to economic injustice.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons why a Black man does not call the police when there's an issue in his neighborhood, yeah. which Ta-Nehisi Coates was talking about in an interview recently,
I mean, one of the most inspiring things to be, to address something positive for a moment is that,
yeah.
it's just like the way in which what's been happening has forced open our cultural imagination in terms of like, just what's happening in Minneapolis, like, like shutting down the police and like reimagining what it would be like to have an alternative. I mean, what do we want to call it besides police? Community, grassroots, support force or whatever it is, just the very idea that something so normalized and naturalized in our cultural imagination, like the police, that we're at a juncture where we're actually capable of considering alternatives and showing the ultimate arbitrariness of a militarized police force is really exciting. It's really inspiring.
Very. I find that so much hope too. And even Coates himself said he feels hope, which is so rare to hear him say. He was on the Ezra Klein podcast recently saying just that the fact that we're discussing defunding the police and what that actually means to defund the police, and exactly that, the alternatives, more towards restorative justice, and to have designated de-escalators, for example, in communities, which is very different than calling the police. When he was saying that some communities already have that, like sometimes there's like, I'm just totally, taking what Coates said and saying it not as well, but he said that in, his communities growing up in poor Black neighborhoods, that there would be always like maybe like an older Black man who was like the de-escalator. You'd call that, but you'd never call the cops. You'd call the de-escalator. But if we could have that, as part inherent and part of the American system, would be amazing. I do think we're quite far from that, but I think that there is hope that we're thinking about that and languaging it,
Yeah.
Oh, and one of the lines that Richard Wolff said, which I think is important, I couldn't remember, is that he said, the police come in because, and this is, I'm quoting him, because they then became the people who could present one face to the whites who were exempted from the business cycle. And he described the business cycle as these cycles of collapse. He says if you look at it, every 4 years, there's a financial collapse in the business world. And that you could count, and though the police present one face to the whites who are exempted from the business cycle, who could count on their jobs being more or less steady. They didn't need the police for them, but you needed the police for the people who have been really screwed. And I think that's really important in respect to talking about looting. The people who have been really screwed, they are the people who, of course, are going to, when this is presented, loot and then be brutalized by the police. Does that make sense?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. Like there's all in the capitalist system, there's basically the majority are screwed and the minority are protected. The minority are the only people making, by minority, I don't mean racial minority. I mean financial minority.
Yeah.
Making, wealthy. But anyways, I keep going back to that thing, but I just think it's important to remember that. I know we probably have to wrap up, but I don't know what this all has to do with yoga. I think I'm definitely in a spiritual crisis in sense that when you ask like where we've come to now, I would say that, and if we're going to end soon, it would be that every month I less and less want anything to do with the yoga community.
Interesting. Well, what I wanted to, yeah, that's what I actually was about to circle back to was, and I love the, the kind of way we've gone with the interview, because it's, we've gotten more political outside the context of the yoga community, but that's always fun anyway. But I wanted to, in the great spirit of our 5-year strong tradition of skewering the yoga community, like, what do you find distasteful now?
Yeah. I mean, I guess so much, but I want to end also I'll say what I still like about yoga, I think is important to say.
Yeah.
But what I find distasteful is exactly that quote I read earlier, that what I feel is happening, and again, it's not their fault, is that women are being forced to become these, self-help wellness advocates online. Yeah. So they're there to basically promote the pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality, but cloaked in neo-spiritual language. And I find it very distasteful. I'm glad that people seem to be able to make a living. I think it's like, I get that we all have to do that, but what we're being forced to do, and I'm not saying that, let's say, I'm just going to call somebody Jane. Let's say Jane wrote that aphorism, and there's so many people like Jane who have the same profiles on Instagram. They have a picture, a selfie. They have one day a selfie talking about, how to get ahead, giving also business advice, webinars that are either pay or free about, how to set up your Instagram, what your greatest desires are and how you can fulfill your own dreams, business-wise, etc. And then the next day, it's a written aphorism, like the one I read, and then it's a selfie the next day or a little mini Instagram live talk. And there's so many, profiles like that across the board. And that is what I don't like. So that, in my opinion, many yoga teachers I once respected and knew and really enjoyed the class, that's what they do now, And I don't blame them. Again, I think they're a victim of the system, and they would laugh and think this was crazy. I'm calling them a victim. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, of course, they're not victims, but yes, I do think they are. Because I think you're a victim when you're delusional about what is building, what the backbone of the system is,
Yeah, when you actually think that, like, the things, the statements that you're making are, like, authentically coming from your truest self rather than from a, completely entrenched ideology that you don't even recognize as being an ideology.
Perfectly said. Thank you. I'm going to write that down later.
I'm going to put that up as my meme for the day. That's actually my least favorite thing, actually. And there is somebody that we both know who does this. Yeah. For those who do like memes or like a quote by themselves, and then they quote themselves, they have like it would be like, I said this, blah, 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 Jacob Kyle. And then I put that on my Instagram.
I may have done that before, to tell you the truth. I'll have to look at my page, but I think when I did it, it was probably funny.
It was tongue-in-cheek in some way.
Yes. Yeah, that's what I hate. And I hate also, but I think this is getting better, is the ideology of niceness.
Yeah.
And that, and I've been often like gotten pushback from like Elena Brower's people, like, how dare I take other women down, and that it's very, and the word divisive is used, and mean. And
you're considered a bully by a few people.
Yes, definitely. And I own up to the fact that I have bullyish behavior, like what I said on Jessica Bellafato's page. And like I say, that's my weak spot when I go into the bully behavior.
After some tequila.
So, yeah. Exactly. And that's only when I'm trolling somebody. But bullying behavior, but I do not own up to bully behavior when it's my own page and my own work. And if somebody is going to put a meme out there or a quote on their page for the public, that's public consumption. You know what I'm saying? Once you post that square on Instagram, sorry, bitch, it's up for grabs. You know what I'm saying? I cross out the names often when I repost too, so I'm not calling any specific person out. I've never called Elena Brower out. I mean, I am right now, but I've never said her name. it's a conglomeration of many personas, but she is very inspirational to me. She's personally to me. But yes, I do think that I have displayed bullyish behavior when I truly have lost my patience for, the idiocracy. And I will own up to it. Like Jessica Belfalt and I DM'd each other, and I said, yeah, I came on pretty strong, and I just get very impatient, but then I couldn't, and then I apologized, and then the next day I wrote the thing about Alex Jones and Trump, because then she posted another thing, and I was like, okay, no, I can't.
You guys had just made up, and then you skewered her again.
And then I trolled her again. But yeah, I know I'm considered a bully, and yeah, what can I do? But I guess I am somewhat. I have arguments even with my own community, about
Well,
things.
it was interesting. I met someone one time who was actually, they had never met you in real life, and then they did, and they were pleasantly surprised at how lovely you are in like personal conversation, because they had this idea that you were kind of a bully on social media and not very nice, and then they were pleasantly surprised by who you are in person.
Oh, I'm glad
that was funny.
that. I mean, I'm glad to hear that. I know. I mean, as you know well, because you've taken my class, you know me. Yeah, I think I'm at heart I'm truly not a bully in my regular, like anything, my husband's always annoyed that whatever, it's a cliche, I don't know how to say no and all that stuff. And, I nurse my children until they're 10 years old and sleep in the same bed with my son. And I just like to be naked and cozy by the fire. And there's nothing I like more than hanging out with a cocktail and draping my legs over some friends. Yeah. And
I feel like you want to show your breasts again, don't you, Alex?
I really do, yeah.
Okay, yeah, show them. This will be for those that...
Look,
beautiful.
You can really how do you like the way this one is, like, I would say 3 times the size of this?
Yeah, how did that happen? Is that the one you breastfed with?
No, I mean, maybe it always was a little bigger, but at this age, it really changed. And I do sometimes wish that this one was this size, because I can get away without a bra with just this one. But this one, no, basically at my belly.
So for anybody who is listening, that will be available on the YouTube version of this interview for those that want to see Alex's breasts in action.
If you want to see my...
Well, that's an interesting note to end on. Well, maybe it'll act as a segue to our third interview together at some point. Alex, do you want to share a little bit about, what's coming up for you? I mean, obviously everything's online these days, and those who have not yet found your inspiring Instagram handle, it is Alex Auder.
Technically my name is pronounced, but don't feel embarrassed when you hear the
Auder.
real pronunciation, Jacob. It's Auder.
Auder. Oh my gosh.
Yes. But no, I don't care. Nobody says it. I never correct. I truly don't give 2 shits. But then sometimes people get mad at me when they once in a blue moon hear it said right, and they're like, why don't nobody say it? Nikki, none of my best friends say it, but it is Auder.
Auder.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Alex Auder. A-U-D-R. It's confusing. It's some weird French made up name. And I have I still have my website, maguyoga.com, magu.com, where all the links to my digital offerings are available. I teach a couple live classes every week, and then I have like a very large on-demand platform. So it's still I still use MindBody, which we want to get rid of, but we do it. So you can I have a $55 unlimited monthly membership. So you can get and I offer a couple of guest classes, all my classes. And then you get a weekly Nikki V class, a Pilates class, blah, blah, blah.
Oh, you get a weekly Nikki V class to be in Magu?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yes, we did a little exchange. So I teach one on the Kula platform, and she gives me one.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's great. And my people love it. When I say my people, I just mean my members. My people.
My followers.
And then my husband and I do this podcast called 15 Minutes with Alex, which is sometimes over an hour. It's sort of a joke. It's referring to, the Warhol 50 Minutes. My mother was a Warhol star.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
It's not I think the episodes can be anywhere from goofy talking about personal hygiene and COVID to, couples therapy to the Richard Wolff interview about capitalism. So it's
pretty diverse. Yeah. Yeah.
And,
I love it.
That's it. I mean, right before the pandemic happened, I had finally, from that New York Times article, gotten a literary agent, and I've been writing a memoir basically since I was 20 years old. And we were
Really?
literally about to send out the proposal when everything got shut down.
Oh, shit. And you haven't found yourself finding the time to finish it at this point because of all.
Well, not that. It's just we did finish these days it's also weird. You send like the proposal out, even though most of the book is actually already written. So the proposal is done. My agent, it's so weird saying that, says we will be sending it out soon. So yeah, it's a memoir about growing up in the Chelsea with a crazy mom,
Yeah.
etc., etc. It's called Don't Call Me Home.
Don't Call Me Home.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, I can't wait for that to be published, and maybe after it's published, we can do a third one and talk
I
about
would
it.
love that.
That would be
I would love
amazing.
that.
And you do talk a little bit, I just want to direct those who are listening as well, if they haven't listened to the first podcast.
Yeah.
Alex does talk about her life at the Chelsea somewhat at the beginning of that interview. And then we also talk about, some yoga philosophy stuff, which we didn't talk so much about today, but you have some awesome things to say about it. And of course, your classes, for those who haven't taken them yet, you have, like I've said before, actually, in that previous podcast, you have a really kind of wonderful, eloquent way of integrating the teachings in a way that's not kind of preachy or that kind of annoying Dharma talk style. You really weave in the wisdom in a really beautiful way, and so I just want to mention that to those listening so that they go and experience it for themselves with your online classes.
That's really kind to say. Yeah, I hope that's so, and it's very flattering to hear. And physically, I really try to keep returning us to the like tender inner somatic connection that modern postural yoga can help facilitate. And it's not that it's not like, I don't call my classes gentle necessarily. I do teach like a fundamentals, which is more gentle, 1 day a week. They can be physically challenging, but I'm always trying to protect that feeling of somatic domination that I feel like I'm still recovering from,
Yeah.
And so that's like the work that I find interesting in movement, and that every time I teach, I try to kind of dig into in my own way for myself and how I'm languaging it. Like I feel like I'm always questioning and trying to renew the language,
Yeah. Beautiful. Wow. Well, we've been speaking with Alex Auder, now that I'm pronouncing it the correct way. Thank you so much for your time, Alex. It's, as usual, such a pleasure to see you and chat with you. And I'll talk to you soon.
I want to say it's a true pleasure to talk with you. Like I've done a couple other things, and it's just, I don't know, it's very relaxing and lovely. And you have a way of really letting each other dig into ideas that I find rare these days. So
Thank you. I appreciate that. It means a lot coming from you.